Hello, and my name is Paul Blacklock. I'm a senior lecturer in professional development and international education at the University of Sunderland. Firstly, thank you very much for having me down here at RIDE. I attended online last year and very much enjoyed it. So I wanted to come down for this year. So I'm delighted to be here. And it's been really nice, actually, the last couple of days, working and listening to people who are working with students, as I do, through distance education. So thank you for that. I'm a relatively recent career changer into higher education. I've been with the university for just over 3 years now. And one of the first things I was asked to do was to firstly establish and then run student voice with our distance education students, because it wasn't really up in place. So I did that, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I did that. But then I thought, once I'd done it, it would probably be a good idea to actually ask our distance education students what they wanted from our student voice and how they wanted it to work and how they wanted it to be structured. And spoiler alert, it's not the way that I was doing it. So just a little bit about me as to how I got to this point and why I'm interested in student voice and distance education in particular. As I say, that's my role at the university. This academic year, I started leading our Masters in Education. So that's both for our on-campus students and for our distance education students. The courses, learning objectives are exactly the same, but the two student bodies are separate in that and how they're taught. I'd previously led and worked on our PGCE education. So that's a PGCE largely for teachers working in international schools around the world. So you have a mixture of established teachers who've been working in international schools for years doing it, career changers, as well as people who have perhaps worked in international schools, say as teaching assistants, and are wanting to train up to become teachers within 3 years. I've worked in education for over 20 years, a fairly eclectic career, but education has been the key theme about it. So I taught initially in Japan and in the UK. I worked as an army education officer, and I still do part-time work with them. Also worked in the education and charity sector as well, before then moved to the university, as I say, a few years ago. Got that interest in student voice, but also a sense of belonging as well. One of the things I started when I began this role was my doctorate, which I'm doing part-time alongside my role, particularly looking at sense of belonging in distance education. And student voice, conscious is very much a separate concept, but this is sort of developed as a side project alongside the work that I'm doing on the doctorate. I just wanted to talk to you a bit about that. I won't use that one because it's very wordy. It looks prettier on this slide. The student voice, how did I actually approach it in the first instance, and how did I set it up after I've been asked to do it with initially our PGC education students? That's around 600-700 students we get a year across the world. First of all, I asked students just to self-nominate who want to be course reps. And they were trained by our Students' Union. So I worked clearly with our Students' Union beforehand, developed how this could look, and we came to an agreement of how they can support and what I can do as well. And the Students' Union trained the course reps, so that was online, and that was synchronous and asynchronous training that they provided. The Students' Union then created a questionnaire for the students to use. I had input clearly into those questions, as did colleagues. But they own that Microsoft form. So all the data that goes into that goes to the Students' Union. I can't see any of it. Part of that was for that objectivity. So students knew that it was going to the union, not to me or any other staff. A couple of times a year, I shared that questionnaire. We put out weekly announcements on our distance education courses, and that questionnaire was shared throughout those couple of times a year, for a few weeks at a time, for students to be able to feed back and give that. The Students' Union then worked with the course reps to read through all of that information and identify what the key themes were that were coming from that. Themes themselves were anonymized, and they were sent to us as staff or to me, and I then distributed it to colleagues. And then I met, and other members of the academic team met with the course reps to discuss that feedback, identify what changes we can make, how we can change things, as well as also, of course, what's actually going well and what we need to do more of and continue doing. And we provided that, again, as an action plan effectively, was then distributed to all the students through those weekly announcements, so everyone was able to see what we're doing. We did have a number of changes as a result of that. So there was that earlier feedback that was given on teaching. So within the PGC education, due to clearly teaching in international schools at that point, they can get feedback from staff at an earlier point on that. There was a reduced requirement for lesson planning evidence, looking more on quality rather than quantity, actually picking apart why lessons had been designed in a particular way. Flexibility for accessing subject specialist lessons. We have also PGC IQTS, so relatively recent. It's only been available for about 3 years, where if you're based internationally, you can gain qualified teacher status, so to be able to teach and maintain school in England or Wales. Through one of these courses as well. There's some reduced academic content on the practice modules. And again, I won't go through all the different elements. We did make a good number of changes as a result of some of that student voice feedback. Then what I wanted to do was actually to find out, as I say, what our students actually wanted. This linked into a degree with the work I was doing on sense of belonging, and I worked across 3 different forms of our distance education courses. So we have I've talked around our PGC education and IQTS courses, where the academic content is taught by us online, a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous. Students on those courses are also in international schools at the time as well, so they're getting mentorship specifically on their teaching on the academic work. From mentors within the school. And then they also have personal academic tutors. So students are split into groups of around 15 or 20, where they've got the option of weekly meetings, drop-ins with their academic tutor as a group to talk through either their teaching practice or the academic. Also, our master's students are online or distance education master's students, which is a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous teaching. They don't have those tutor groups in the same way as the PGCE, but they have a mixture of synchronous and asynchronous, as well as some of the courses that we teach through Sunderland Online, which is purely asynchronous. So there isn't any of that direct interaction with staff. They were the 3 courses, or the 3 types of courses. And I wanted to get an idea of where students were. So I designed some questions as well as some follow-up interviews with them. I haven't quite finished the interviews. This is just sort of my hot takes on the research, where it is at this point, and I'll be able to look at that in more detail and analyse it better once I'm finished the interviews, hopefully in the next few weeks. Within the questionnaire that's sent out, that was co-created with distance education students. I had an idea of the sorts of questions I was wanting to ask based on my reading and my research. So I presented some of those to them, which were adapted by students. They suggested some of their own questions, and also some of the changes, for example, were questions that I was wanting to ask as part of the questionnaire. Some of our distance education students had advised to actually put in the follow-up interviews in order to maximise the returns that we're getting. So focusing more in the questionnaire on those, quick or Likert scale type questions, as well as adapting some of the language I was using. One of the things I wanted to check was, I might be asking a question in a certain way, but is the way I'm asking it actually being understood in the way that I mean? So there was quite a few changes in the language I was using as a result. One of the elements I used within it was revised classroom community scale, just as an indicator, really, in the first instance as to where students were on particular factors. Say the open questions I had moved to interviews. One of the aspects on student voice in particular was a ranking activity. So I worked again with our former distance education students and identified different ways student voice could potentially work. I was in a talk yesterday, actually, when it was somebody talking around actually scraping the data using AI from open forums as well, which is a really interesting one. I didn't think of that when I was doing this. But it was put as a ranking activity, and you can see on the board there the different options that were brought up, and asked any respondents to the survey to just put them in whatever order, first preference to last preference. Yeah, I wanted to maximise the returns I had, so I trialled that questionnaire with our TEL team, so our technology enhanced learning team, who was a really good bunch to work with one of our former students working in software development. one of the university ethics committee for getting all the ethics. Support that. So when it went out, as I say, this was to all students studying in distance, got 305 responses from 61 different countries, and 10 different areas of study, some of which I've put on the board there, and roughly around half were interested in being interviewed. Thankfully, not all 166 wanted a one-to-one interview eventually, but it was a good return. What were some of the initial conclusions I have drawn from that? This surprised me because irrespective of where they were or the course they were on or anything, there was real consistency in what students were actually asking for and what they wanted or wanted student voice to look like. And that was online survey, in effect. With that was consistently the top choice for many, many students, and second choice of written feedback via email. But that was really one of the questions that I then developed for the interviews as to why, because we know we all get surveys all the time, and how many responses do you actually get to make it representative? So I was really interested to find out why that's what people are actually asking for. And slightly gutting the way I'd set it up, course rep was consistently put as one of the least preferred options for students. Well, again, that was another thing I was really interested in looking into. Why is that less popular for distance students? So then moved to interviews. As I say, I'm still doing those interviews at the moment. So I've just done some analysis and themes of what I'm seeing so far. This is just across all those different forms of distance education. I've not gone into, say, those 3 different elements as yet. It's just as I say. What were some of those key themes? So one was that strong preference for asynchronous feedback. And I was asking, well, why? Why is it you want to do another survey in order to give us feedback on how things go in the course? And the sort of responses I'm getting back is, first of all, it's quick and it's easy, and I can access it nice and straightforward on my mobile, which is how I access some of the content that you do, especially the recorded content, whether I'm, say, commuting or on the tube or whatever. It's easily accessible across all different time zones. And as you can see from the range of different countries or the number of countries, we do have students across all sorts of different time zones. It gives students space to think. They're not being asked for something immediately and not having to do it, so they've got that time to reflect and think around their answers. It feels lower pressure as a result. And as we know with distance education students, it's been brought up many times over the last couple of days, it's that flexibility that really does make a difference. Especially our postgraduate distance education students, they're balancing their study alongside careers, caring responsibilities, all the different elements of life. There was a strong desire for co-creating those questions and to ensure that relevance, that buy-in, and that desire for sort of more focused and specific questions, particularly around the use of technology or the support services that are available to distance education students, which also on the final point that I'll make as well. They did say that, closed and multiple choice questions, they're good to get responses, but to still have that flexibility of free text within those surveys to be able to articulate more clearly what from that. Anonymity and psychological safety feels like something that's coming through quite strongly at the moment. Doing feedback in this way allows students to be more honest, especially when it's things around, say, course design or tutors, for example. Or negative experience that they may have. I want to balance this with also emphasizing feedback on the positive things as well, so we know what's actually going on correctly. Some have said that if it wasn't anonymous, they would worry about, say, being identified or judged if it was in public feedback or feedback they were having to give sort of physically online. Course reps was not suitable for distance education students, and that was one of the questions I really wanted to know more about. Well, why is that not the case? It's like, well, many don't know who their course reps are, and they don't feel that. So they don't necessarily feel that they're represented by them. They also question whether information that they're giving could get filtered in some sort of way, or potentially even distorted via a course rep. Because they don't meet them, because they don't have that interaction online directly, then trust is low. Closing the feedback loop, of course, clear communications about what actually happens after the feedback is one of the consistent things that was asked for, just so they can see that this is very much an ongoing conversation. It's not just us extracting information, it's an ongoing conversation. Again, linking back to point two really around that creation. Then lastly, which links into the point I was making earlier, is around inclusion and parity of esteem or parity treatment. A lot of the students I've spoken to so far have framed student voice in terms of terms, because they notice when there's central communications from the university, which are more focused really towards your traditional on-campus students. So it might be access to certain facilities, activities, materials, all that things, and they feel like they're sort of tacked on in addition as part of it. I would caveat that with what I'm certainly finding on the masters is that more of our distance education students are not only based in the UK, but based locally to where we are, so easily within travelling distance of the university, but they're making a conscious choice to study online. So some of those activities would actually still be available for some distance education students. We've talked about, students talk about accessibility, things that have been talked about the last couple of days, like that linking to being heard as distance education students. And they also just wanted those consideration of constraints to be reflected in their as part of their student knowledge as well, the different time zones, the different benefits they have too. So there's sort of the initial themes that I'm bringing out at the moment across those three different forms of distance education. Got a few more interviews lined up over the next couple of weeks or so, and then once that's done, I'll be able to go through and do a proper analysis, both of more the questionnaire and the interviews themselves. Portions of the time, but I was going to ask, if you do have time, some questions of yourselves as well, because I am genuinely interested in how student voice yourself. I can just leave these as food for thought, because I'm also very conscious that I'm currently the barrier between you and actual food for lunch. So I'm happy to do food for thought. But if anybody wants to talk about either student voice or sense of belonging in education, I'm always really keen to do that.